Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are in a very interesting moment in Web3. There is no shortage of capital, project, or attention. But trust still feels surprisingly fragile. In a space built on transparency, decisions are very much driven by network, introduction, or reputation. And when you move beyond those trusted circles, it becomes really hard to separate real signals from noise. And this is what I'd like to discuss today. And for this, I'm joined by three great perspectives. First, we have Suleiman Al-Ansari from the Institutional Growth at Binance. We have Brendan McKittrick from Infrastructure, and he's also an investor in the space. And we have Arnaud Krimer, who is a founder and also an investor. So we have institution, infrastructure, investor, and founder lenses on the table today. We should make this conversation very interesting. So I will start my first question, gentlemen. What actually makes a Web3 project investable beyond hype, timing, and narrative? And I'll start with you, Suleiman.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a pleasure being with such a good panel along a lively environment after silence has dominated this region for a short period, I would say. But this is a very important topic, right? And Binance is kind of central within this. So I'm gonna be quite direct and represent my perspective from basically the people or the clients. Yeah, are we safe? Good. No worries. So basically my perspective on this comes from working closely with sophisticated market participants, right? Across different cycles. So my opinion when I discuss this space comes down to how risk is managed, what's the proper utility for the token, and at the same time governance that is very important for serious capital to consider such an environment, right? So going back to your question, which is what makes an investable project in Web3? So from a practical lens, given that in a way we are exposed to how the traffic is moving, it comes down to the projects that stand up to scrutiny beyond narratives. And this comes down to 5 main things: a real use case, most importantly, a team that can build, evidence of genuine user demand, and at the same time, strong, let's say, risk discipline. Because these are the main areas where the importance is, right? So in this market, I think attention is not, let's say, hard to generate. But the harder test here is whether the project will remain credible and relevant after the hype and the incentives are a bit fading away. So from an institutional facing standpoint, the quality of the traction matters more than the quantity of the traction, and that's what I think.
Shall I answer the same question?
Yes.
So, well, first of all, to the organisers, thanks for having us here, absolutely honoured. And it's great to see Dubai bouncing back, as we all knew it would. In terms of the whole investing landscape, I came from a more traditional background with private equity, where we bought, companies from 10 million to 650 million. And when I went into Web3, the metrics were completely different. And I went in as a founder because I saw an opportunity to bring the tech. But there was a very difficult grind between the Web3 model and the traditional investing model, because there was no metrics to grab and hold, like ARR and the stickiness of customers and so forth, because you were selling a dream. And what often became the measurement was community. How big is the community? How powerful is the community? And that began to wane as well, because big communities weren't necessarily the end all and be all. So it became then, beyond the community, was there utility? And we heard a lot of talk about utility, and that became the big player at one stage. So the pump and dump, and then the utility and so forth. What's starting to happen is it's starting to settle down now, and the sort of maverick investment environment where you made a quick buck has kind of faded, and it's giving way to more institutional, attention. And one of the talks at the time was, TradFi is going to be eclipsed by this new DeFi. What really happened was TradFi started to absorb the working bits from DeFi, so stablecoins. Stablecoins are pretty much TradFi now. They're no longer DeFi, even though they brought the DeFi into TradFi. The next one might be, tokenization of properties and so forth. So I think it's going to be a slow assimilation into the traditional model. But what comes with that then is the same metrics. You're going to have to show the metrics that they're accustomed to. It's no longer okay to say I've got so many people in a community around this token. That works as a kind of a pump and a dump, but it's always going up. And I think the separation of token price action from actual revenue generating, capacity for the company is going to be absolutely key, and that's what we're seeing.
So I also share a few thoughts on the same question. So basically, I'm not exactly from the Web3 world, I'm from the media world, so I'm a Hollywood producer, Bollywood producer, I produced a successful game, and so on. But I'm an investor in Web3 since 2018, and I'm also co-owner of different Web3 projects since last 3-4 years or so. So I have some exposure to the space. And what you're saying is very true. The trust is the main issue. And the tech is amazing. There's very good teams out there. There is capital. Everything what you said is true. And the trust is a major issue. And we all know also why there is a trust issue, because there was all kind of meme coins and all kind of foul players. But it's of course sad because there's also so many amazing projects and so many so much innovation and so much also transparency and really certain qualities which the traditional tech cannot supply. So if you reflect on it, it's also to do with the retail at the end of the day, the normal retail customer, because if they buy the meme coins, then a lot of people in the Web3 space create this kind of projects and so on, like a demand. So I think it's also one major point which could help the whole space is just education of the general public, because if somebody doesn't really study it, doesn't really care for it, but just wants to make a quick buck, so we are stuck on that kind of superficial level. And how to educate the wider public, that's a question we have to think about. But the trust issue, also in my industry in Hollywood, it's huge. There is a lot of distrust against blockchain, but I think the major issue is that people didn't really take the time to sit down and study it and see what it actually is. I think we're still on that level.
Thank you, Jet. Great insights. So the second question I have for you is, if blockchain is transparent by design, why is trust still so fragile in Web3 then?
I love this question, actually. It's ironic, because, if you think of it from my perspective, the blockchain is made to be transparent, right? But transparency really does not equal trust. And we know that from an institutional standpoint. So for you to be able to establish, let's say, proper credibility, I would say we would need to pair transparency with governance, with the proper, let's say, agenda so that you can identify whether, you know, the need for institutions is actually possible or not in this. But if I would put this in one word, the market has learned that being able to see activity is different from being able to rely on the system of it. So let me elaborate a little bit further, right? So data on chain can be transparent, but it can be hard to interpret because of, let's say, misincentives and misgovernments and so on. So not every thing you see could be interpreted into the healthy kind of demand that we want to look for the right adoptions to take place.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it comes down to true decentralization versus centralization. The movement behind blockchain, if you go back far enough, the drive was to create an environment that didn't require middlemen. So historically, banking is dominated by middlemen. Even aviation, the systems they use go back to the 1960s, and they're run by middlemen. And Sabre, Amadeus, these systems are very hard to remove. And having a blockchain that says, I can do this differently without a middleman, relies on the veracity of the decentralization. Now, in the last 12 months, we'd have several L1s who claim to be decentralized freeze wallets. And that's a shock to the system. We say, well, hold on a minute. My keys, my wallet, kind of goes out the window. And that sort of leads into open source. If there's an open source environment, a decentralized environment, I think it's going to become AI native, so autonomous, and regulated. I think if you get those four, you can re-establish that trust. Because bear in mind, blockchain is trustless. It's the idea you don't need trust to operate. And it hasn't delivered on that entirely. And that's the big question. It's a great question, and I think it's an evolving space.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, transparency is important for trust, but it's not the only component. And regulation would be another important component. And in general, it's still a new space. And in a new space, you have this kind of, it's just a process, it's just a growing process, I feel, for the industry. And some people also feel it's maybe just a flavor of the day, but I feel definitely blockchain is the future and it will come and manifest eventually. And the people who are now in the space will benefit when it goes more and more mainstream. So that's my point on it.
Thank you very much. The next question is, a lot of strong deal flow still sit inside networks. Do you think it can scale?
I have to be careful about this. I mean, if we have the right environment, again, just to reiterate on some points, we might see major adoptions happening. But the real bottleneck here is having the proper infrastructure for the adoption. That, of course, involves regulations, it involves having the right execution layers, it involves having the right custody layers. So the combination of all of that would increase confidence, I believe, so that you can see more, capital shifts happening in the space. And that's what I can elaborate on from where we sit in Binance.
Cindy, can I ask you to define what you mean by network?
So it's back to what I said initially. So, as we know, blockchain is very transparent, but main decision when you want to invest in a deal are driven by your network, the people you know, people who introduce you, people they know, based on the reputation. So this is what the network means, people you already know and people you're very close to. You will not probably go beyond that trusted network if you wanted to invest in a new project in Web3, or would you?
I get where you're coming from. So if I can maybe relate to an experience I had myself in aviation, where we were solving a big problem, several big problems in aviation for airports, for airlines, and we led with the technology and the conversations, and we weren't successful because we frightened people with new technology, new domains, and the IT department just panicked that their surface area would increase, and we weren't part of their trusted network in the new world. In the old world, I had 450 airlines using the products that I was CTO to, so I thought I'd walk in the door with this new tech and everybody would love me. But it was a step too far for the IT departments because of the legacy world was so tight. From that point of view, the network is very closed. So moving from Web 2 to Web 3 is often a step too far for a network to change. And I think that's the reason Web 2.5 was born, to sort of say, look, it's not really over there, it's over there, it's a smaller step. And that was more tempting for people to say, I'll step into this space. Now what's happened with stable coins, it's part of the old world. It's stable coins as a way of transporting value in the old banking system, and you won't see SWIFT anymore. You know, it'll be cross-border will disappear in the way that we know it. So I think the networks grow slowly outwards, and this is one of the reasons funding in Web3 is a lot slower than perhaps people expected for real projects, is that the old world had to adjust itself to be ready to receive this new technology. And that's also, as Arno mentioned, it's part regulation. Would I touch software that's not regulated, that's new and can do many things? Regulation would give me a lot more comfort as a consumer. So I think regulation helps to standardize the offering and make it more acceptable as well.
Yeah, I also feel it's a back and forth between the old and the new world. The great thing is that in blockchain you could create a new world, but then how you sync it back to the old world. So that's the tug of war also which is going on. And at some point it felt maybe like all these ideals of this new world getting kind of subdued by the powers of the old world. But I feel that it's still moving in the right direction, and it's just a natural process and an organic growth, and you have to kind of sync this new innovation with the world which is out there. Otherwise it cannot scale and it cannot go mainstream. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, what risk is still underestimated by founder and investor today?
So you started by funder and investor, the most underestimated risk. From my perspective, let's say. All right. So I think the priority here would be mistaking surface interactions or visibility with durable and proper demand, right? And that's where I see most of projects kind of stop the continuity, right? Because eventually you can easily get momentum through like incentives, the early participation and so on. But the challenge comes with maintaining this and still bringing and adding value after those incentives go, and after, of course, you being resilient within market cycles, because this is what proves that you're in a way able to carry on. So having the understanding of those two main things, I believe those are the main underestimated risks.
Great question. I think there's a temptation to get lost in the bubble of Web3 and to think that, you know, tokenization, the movement of value through tokens solves so many problems that it's just a shoe-in that a bank will say, we'll do this, or a fintech will always include crypto as part of their portfolio. But what I find is that I go to different conferences, which are not Web3 conferences. Web3 is very marginal. It's a really small part of the play. And crypto hasn't really dented into those traditional markets as much as you would think. And the number of wallets that people in the general public have is quite limited. So I think that's changing, but it's still a massive risk that people underestimate the adoption propensity. I think it's quite low compared to what people think it is.
I think one massive risk what people underestimate is to have no exposure to this new space. So if I would be high net worth individual or a family office, I would be very worried to not have any exposure to this space. So there's a risk of investing, but there's also a risk of not being part of at all of such a innovative space. So that's what would worry me if I'm a family office without exposure.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what signal will define projects that actually last, in the next 3 to 5 years? What really the projects, the founders will need to have, in your opinion, in your fields, in order to last?
I mean, it's very hard to have a decisive answer to this, I would say, simply because if we already knew, things would have been on the right track. But there are some ways where we can start. Basically, having a proper utility for the project is one way. Building trust for the project, so that you can remain being like a trustworthy project for the continuity of, let's say, whatever you're trying to solve as a problem. Adaptability, of course, as my fellow panelists said, they have to adapt to systems that are currently working in the structure that we have. And of course, strong governance and security, because if we don't have that clear, it's hard to see serious capital indulge. So I think the combination between all 5 of them would give projects a good chance to remain in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
I would say there's 2 aspects to it. One is you have to be solving a real problem in the world. You have to be the best at it. And to maintain the momentum as a Web3 project, because what often happens is a Web3 project becomes a Web2 project because of the consumption on the far side. They don't maintain the tokenization or the smart contracts. They go for the shortcut to sell something that the customer needs. So, and sometimes that's cheaper than evangelizing a market. But if you're talking about a successful Web3 project, solve a real world problem, and secondly, be truly democratized. So you maintain that momentum around the community, that you do share the value and the upsides, because that's the true value of Web3.
Yeah, I agree, and I can't add much more to that. It's true, you need to solve a real world problem. And also, I would say, just doing something what is already there and just put it on the Web3, that's not enough. For example, a Web3 game which is just like a Web2 game, and there's no difference. It's just like a normal game, but on the blockchain. So I think one has to understand the specifics of that space and do something what could be only done in Web3 and nowhere else, and not just try to do Web3 for Web3's sake.
Thank you. So the last question is, what needs to change before institutional capital enters Web3 at scale?
Okay, finally something a bit more relevant. I would say several things, right? But starting off with what is noticeable as the great ask when it comes to serious capital institutions, right? So proper governance, is one of them. And the regulations need to be clear for that sort of money to come in. So that's number one, right? And then of course you need the proper infrastructure for the execution for such, serious wealth. When you're talking about retails or just trying out projects, it's fine. But when you discuss serious capital, they need that infrastructure to be there. And also brings me back to the next point. You definitely need to have the right custody solutions, because that's a big worry for serious money and institutional money. And of course, I would say also the combination of all of that being in one place, which is what Binance is doing at the moment, is what's needed so that you have that environment where it's comfortable for serious capital to be allocated in, from my perspective.
I was involved in a project last year where we looked at regulations for an international financial center. And we tried to figure out what was required for a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, which is something that gets lost in the mix. It's a very beautiful thing. There's very few success stories. And one of the reasons is it's a truly decentralized governance model that doesn't fit into the centralized legacy model. So we looked at regulation of how you can accommodate that. That was fascinating, and I think if regulations could accommodate that, it's not as frightening as it looks. And it's not like something where they say, oh, there's this big bunch of people in a community, we can't sue anybody in the old adversarial model. So this is a challenge. So the regulations that can handle that, I think will create the opportunity to bring the money. There's also other aspects around things like smart contracts, which are very powerful tools, not necessarily contracts, but they're operational code that solve a lot of autonomous problems in many industries. And I also think that we need to see major adoption of these tech into major legacy players that then opens the door to funding and so forth, because we've got to see real world problems being solved at scale, as opposed to a bunch of guys, running a Web3 game where there's some sort of benefit for a very close community. And lastly then is, I don't think we've realized the benefits of tokenization of value and the sharing of profit through tokenization. I think that's an extraordinarily underutilized space where games are doing a little bit of it, but where you can actually share the money back with the community.
Regulations.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think that's also what's also very interesting from what we discussed today overall. There's one fundamental thing in Web3. It's not just about access. It's not just about information or timing, hype, narrative. I would say it's about people and understanding their behavior over time, how they will react to different type of circumstances through the cycles. Because ultimately this is where capital is trying to underwrite, I believe. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The panelists will be available if you have any further questions. But I'd like to thank you all. Thank you for coming, and a big round of applause to our panelists, please. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. And now we've got Arnaud, who is going to make an introduction about his business.
I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you. So, I'm an investor in Web3 for last 8 years or so, and because I know the space and I'm a former professor of script writing and a former script writer and a producer, so I'm now developing and producing different films, TV series also related to Web3. And it's not documentaries, but it's like major productions. So in past 2 years alone, I worked with Jason Momoa, Gal Gadot, Al Pacino, Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, and so on. Many of the biggest names in the history of entertainment. And we're working currently on a Netflix series based on a big scam, a true story for which I obtained the rights. So if that is something where you want to know more, you can find me. Maybe not exactly your cup of tea if you're only from Web3, but I just wanted to mention it, and we are here, all the panelists, and we are ready to have some conversations and some interesting discussions. Thank you.